You were not chosen at random. The narcissist's brain was running a scan the whole time, at a speed faster than conscious thought, underneath anything they would call thinking. And the thing it was scanning for was not your beauty. It was not your intelligence. It was not even your kindness. It was a very specific frequency. A frequency of self-erasure that you had been broadcasting quietly since you were small, without any awareness that you were. Take a slow breath. We have time. There is a finding I want to hold until the second half of this. A specific, documented piece of research about what narcissists actually see when they look at a person like you. What that research has found contradicts the most common story about what went wrong. And if you have spent any time at all blaming yourself for how long it took to name what was happening, that finding will, I think, land on you differently than anything else in this. For now, the question worth sitting with is this one. Why does this keep happening to the same kind of person? Why, if you talk to 10 different people who have left a narcissistic relationship, do you hear the same story told in 10 different voices? The same unbearable beginning, the same slow unraveling, the same long unwinding afterwards. The pattern is too consistent to be accidental. Something is matching, something specific. And for a long time, the conversation about this has stopped at a sentence that feels true, but is not useful. The sentence is this: opposites attract. It is almost never what is happening. The common story goes like this. The empath and the narcissist are two ends of a spectrum. One gives, one takes. One feels everything, one feels nothing. And somehow, through bad luck, bad timing, a rainy afternoon, the wrong friend's party, the two of them collided. He took advantage. She gave too much. Opposites attracting. It sounds reasonable. It is almost entirely wrong. Because if they were opposites, you would have seen it coming. The wrongness would have registered at the first meeting. The instinct would have refused. But that is not what happened, is it? Something else registered in that first moment. Something that felt somehow closer to recognition than to warning. Some part of you that had been lonely for a very long time sat up straighter, as though it had finally heard a voice it had been waiting its whole life to hear. That part was not broken. That part was not naive. That part was responding exactly the way a nervous system responds when it locates, after years of looking, the particular shape of a person it was designed to fit. Empaths and narcissists are not opposites. They are complements. Two specific childhood adaptations, each shaped to complete the other. One nervous system, trained from very early, to scan for someone who would never leave, no matter what was done. Another nervous system, trained from very early to never leave, no matter what was done. A lock and a key, each carved out of a different kind of pain. The lock and the key do not know they are fitting. They only know, in that first meeting, the overwhelming sensation of finally being seen, finally being chosen, finally a feeling that could almost be called home. And that feeling, that specific full-body sensation of arrival, is the first thing researchers want you to know, is not love. It is not, at its root, attraction. It is not chemistry. It is not destiny. It is not a soul match. It is not a sign. It is pattern completion. Two histories, each separately shaped, meeting in a way that makes each one feel, for the first time, explicable. That sensation of being understood is so overwhelming in the early days that most people who have been through this describe it afterwards as the most intense connection of their lives. It was intense. It was not connection. The person the narcissist was seeing was not the adult you have become. The person the narcissist was seeing was a much younger version of you. A version who learned, before she could spell her own name, that love was earned by reading other people's needs before those people said them aloud. And what he was showing you, in return, the version of himself you fell in love with, the one who seemed so attentive, so understanding, so surprisingly aligned with everything you had ever wanted, was not quite a lie. It was something stranger than a lie. A version of you, handed back to you by someone whose lifelong skill was reading what another person wanted to see and becoming it on demand. That is the piece that is almost unbearable to look at afterwards. The things you loved most about him in the beginning. The shared values, the uncanny understanding. The sense that he just got you in a way no one ever had. It was you. It was always you. He was showing you your own reflection, and you were calling it recognition. The word for that, in clinical language, is mirroring. The same word Kohut used to describe the thing a child needs from a parent, the accurate reflection of a real self, handed back warmly. A narcissist can perform mirroring with astonishing precision. What they cannot do is sustain it, because there is no stable self underneath it doing the work. What you experienced as intimacy in those early weeks was, for him, more like performance. Exhausting, temporary, maintainable only so long as you were a useful audience. The moment you started to need things from him, the moment you became a person with needs rather than a mirror reflecting his, the performance began almost immediately to dim, and you felt the dimming, even if you could not name it at the time. Some part of you, underneath the explanations you were telling yourself, knew that the person you had fallen in love with was disappearing. You just could not understand where he was going, because he had seemed so consistent in the beginning, so certain. It is hard to accept, even now, that the certainty was never his. The certainty was a technique. To understand where this pattern begins is not to excuse what was done to you. It is to understand the specific shape of the wound in the other person, the one that made them recognize you, of all people, as exactly what they needed. And it begins, like so many things, in a childhood that was not theirs to choose. In 1971, the psychoanalyst Heinz Kohut published work that quietly transformed the understanding of narcissism. Before Kohut, narcissism had been treated as a kind of moral failure, a selfishness to be corrected, a character flaw to be eradicated. Kohut looked at his patients and saw something very different. He saw people who had been, as children, starved of a particular kind of attention. Not love, exactly. Something more specific. He called it mirroring. A child needs to be seen, Kohut argued. Not praised, not performed for. Seen. The caregiver's job is to respond to the child's emerging self as a real thing, to reflect back, accurately and warmly, who this small person is becoming. When that mirroring happens reliably enough, the child builds an internal sense of self that can hold together under stress. When it does not, something else develops in its place. A self that depends, for its basic cohesion, on the reactions of other people. A self that cannot regulate its own worth from the inside, because that particular machinery was never built. Kohut called the people who supply that external regulation self-objects. The narcissistic adult, in his view, is someone who never stopped needing them. Not as companions, as functions, as the missing internal structure outsourced to another human being. To understand this is not to excuse what was done to you. It is to understand the specific shape of what was done, and why you, specifically, were chosen to do it. Because the narcissist in that relationship was never, in any meaningful sense, seeing you. Not strictly speaking. What they were seeing was a function, a mirror-shaped absence in their own psyche that needed filling, and a person whose entire childhood had trained her to fill that kind of absence without being asked. What felt to you like being chosen was, underneath it, being positioned. The warmth of the beginning was real for you. It was real for them, too, in a way. But the reality of it, for them, was closer to relief. The relief of finally locating a supply that would not run out. The research bears out the developmental piece. A 2019 study by Narrated and colleagues using the Self-Object Needs Inventory, a measurement instrument built directly from Kohut's framework, found a clear correlation between pathological narcissism and childhood emotional abuse and neglect. The narcissistic adult was, almost always, originally a child whose basic need to be mirrored was not met, whose nascent self was responded to with coldness, or rage, or absence or expectations it could not possibly fulfill. The damage does not excuse what was done with it, but it explains the shape of what was done, and why they had to find you. Because there is another half to this story, and that half is yours. Before we go there, it is worth slowing down and looking specifically at what happens in that first meeting, at what the narcissist is actually doing in the seconds before they approach you. Based on what the research suggests about how exploitative people scan social environments, a line of work we will come back to shortly, certain cues seem to register faster than others. The cues are not dramatic. They are almost always small. The faint apologetic lean in the posture, the way the eyes move down briefly at a compliment, as though the compliment might be revoked. The slight tendency to finish other people's sentences in the direction the other person seemed to want. The quick, practiced laugh at a joke that was not really funny. None of this is conscious on either side. You are not performing. He is not thinking. But the signals are being transmitted, and they are being read. There is a particular signal that seems to matter more than the others. It is the presence person being observed, of a habit of taking responsibility for other people's emotional states. You know the habit. It is the one that makes you, when a friend seems upset, feel responsible for fixing it before you have even asked what is wrong. It is the one that makes you apologize, reflexively, when someone bumps into you in a crowded room. It is the one that has you smoothing, softening, managing, anticipating, constantly, quietly, without ever being thanked for it, everywhere you go. That habit is visible from the outside, more visible than you think. And what it signals, to a person scanning for it, is a particular kind of person. A person who, if things get hard, will take responsibility. A person who, if there is a conflict, will apologize first. A person who, if the rules start bending, will bend herself rather than name the bending. A person who will, above all, stay. That is what is being looked for. Not beauty, not success, not wit. The specific shape of a person who will stay, even under conditions that should make anyone else leave. And you do not know you are transmitting this because it does not feel to you like anything. It feels like just being you, like just being kind, like just being the person you have been since you were small, which is exactly what it is. It is the person you have been since you were small. The version of you that was built in the house you grew up in, for a purpose you never chose, still doing its job, just without the original employer in the room. To understand why you became that person in the first place, we have to look at the other half of the story, the part that belongs to you. The research on the fawn response is relatively recent. The term was coined by the psychotherapist Pete Walker in his clinical work on complex post-traumatic stress, and formalized in his 2013 book on the subject. Before Walker, the understood responses to threat were three: fight, flight, freeze. Walker added a fourth, and he argued that it had been hiding in plain sight for as long as people had been writing about trauma. The fawn response is this: when a child cannot fight a threat, cannot flee from it, and freezing is not enough, when the threat is located inside the home, worn on the face of the person who is also supposed to be the source of safety, the nervous system finds another way. It appeases, it attunes, it reads the threatening adult's emotional state with a precision most adults never develop, and it adjusts constantly in whichever direction prevents the next outburst, the next withdrawal, the next cold silence. This is the beginning of what is often, later, called empathy. Not the gentle, warm-hearted version the word usually implies. A sharper version, a more exhausted version. A version born from necessity. A version in which reading other people's feelings faster than they can name them is not a gift. It is a job. Your first job, taken on before you could negotiate a wage. If you grew up in a home where the emotional weather changed without warning, a parent who was charming with guests and cold with you, or present one day and absent the next, or loving when you performed well and cutting when you did not, your nervous system did not experience that as a series of individual incidents. It experienced it as a climate, and it adapted to the climate by building a very specific instrument. A kind of antenna, tuned to the subtlest shifts in someone else's mood, constantly broadcasting back exactly the response most likely to de-escalate. This is why you can walk into a room and sense, within 30 seconds, that someone in it is upset, even if no one has said anything. This is why you carry other people's moods home in your body hours after they have stopped feeling them themselves. This is why you have been told your whole life that you feel too much. You were never feeling too much. You were trained, young, to feel for more than one person at a time. The extra feeling was never a personality trait. The extra feeling was a skill. You built it for someone. The employer was usually a parent, not always. Sometimes a sibling. Sometimes an older person in a house where no one else would step in. Sometimes the house itself, a climate of tension without a single clear source, the kind of atmosphere that teaches a child to be useful before it teaches her own name. The specific face varies. The training, for the most part, does not. And what the training produces, whatever its source, is a particular kind of person. A person who can walk into a room and within the first handful of seconds tell you who is angry and who is hiding it, who is happy and who is performing it, who is lonely and who is just quiet. You do not know how you know. You have always known. The knowing is so old that it feels like instinct. It is not instinct, though it feels that way. It is a skill, built young, that you have now been practicing for so long that you cannot remember a time when you lacked it. The fawn response has its own longer telling, how it reaches into the rest of your adult life, what the slow unfawning looks like, why the people who care about you can sometimes feel this pattern in you before you can name it. That is a story for another night. And here is what that training produces in the adult relationship you were actually in. The ghost you were hired to manage at age 5, the unstable parent whose moods you had to track and regulate, whose inner weather you studied the way a farmer studies the sky, walked into a room 30 years later wearing a different face. And your nervous system recognized the job description before your conscious mind registered the face. Call that feeling what you will. Destiny, chemistry, knowing. Underneath all the names, the mechanism was quieter and stranger than any of them. The specific relief of a lifelong skill set. Finally, at last finding an employer. Which is why the leaving is so hard. It is not that you loved him more than other women have loved other men. It is that every impulse you had from the age of 5 onward was specifically designed to make the leaving impossible. Your whole nervous system had been calibrated for staying. And there is a line of research that connects this, that takes it out of the realm of metaphor and into measurable ground. Work on sensory processing sensitivity, a trait studied since the mid-1990s by the psychologists Elaine and Arthur Aaron, has consistently found that roughly 15 to 20% of the population has a nervous system that is literally more reactive to emotional stimuli than the rest of the population. Brain imaging studies, including a 2014 fMRI investigation by Bianca Azevedo and colleagues, have confirmed that highly sensitive people show significantly stronger activation in brain regions associated with awareness, empathy, and self-other processing, particularly in response to emotional cues from others. You are not imagining that your nervous system reads emotions more loudly than other people's do. It does. What is also real, and this is the part most recovery conversations miss, is that a nervous system of that kind, placed in a difficult early environment, does not stay neutral. It gets trained. It becomes a specialist. And what it specializes in, if the early environment is the wrong kind, is managing the emotions of people who cannot manage their own. Which brings us to the finding I wanted to hold for the second half. For a long time, the popular understanding of narcissism has rested on a particular claim. Narcissists, the story goes, lack empathy. They cannot feel what other people feel. That is why they can do the things they do. This claim is everywhere. It is repeated in articles, in therapy, in recovery books, in the advice of well-meaning friends. It is also only half true, and the half that is not true is the half that has been quietly breaking people's hearts. Empathy, it turns out, is not one thing. It is two. Effective empathy is the automatic feeling with, the way your chest tightens when you see a stranger cry, the way your stomach drops when someone near you receives terrible news. It is involuntary. It is bodily. It happens underneath thought. Cognitive empathy is something else. It is the capacity to understand what another person is feeling, accurately, precisely, often in remarkable detail, without necessarily feeling it alongside them. It is the skillful reading of emotional states from the outside. Decades of research, including a 2020 meta-analysis by Bonaviciute and Hepper, synthesizing data from over 30,000 participants, point in a specific direction. In narcissism, the affective empathy is impaired. The cognitive empathy is not. And in one specific subtype of narcissism, the cognitive empathy is not merely intact. It is sharpened. Conrath and colleagues, in work published in 2014, examined the relationship between a specific facet of narcissism, exploitativeness, and the ability to read emotion in others. What they found contradicted the popular story. Exploitative narcissists were not worse at reading negative emotion. They were better than average. Their skill at recognizing pain in other people was not diminished by their narcissism. It was shaped by it, because they were scanning for it. Let that sit for a moment, which means every moment you spent thinking, maybe if I explain it better, maybe if I show them what this is doing to me, maybe if they could only understand. They already did understand. From the beginning. They understood the shape of your pain with unusual clarity. That was not the problem. The problem was never that they could not see you. The problem was what they did with what they saw. Everything you just heard looks different now. The reason they could find you across a crowded room was not magic. It was not fate. It was not a soul recognition. It was a sharpened cognitive skill, trained for a specific purpose. And the purpose was not connection. It was selection. Your pain was not invisible to them. It was the visible marker they were looking for. Understanding this does not make the leaving easier. It makes the staying explicable, which is not the same thing, but it is a start. There is a version of the recovery conversation that cannot happen until this much is understood. A version where the question stops being, "Why didn't I leave sooner?" and starts being, "What was my nervous system actually doing all those years?" And what it was doing, we now know, was something very specific. It was running a survival program, calibrated in childhood, under conditions that rewarded staying. And that program, by the rules it had been built under, was working perfectly. Research on trauma bonding, the particular kind of attachment that forms in cyclically abusive relationships, has mapped out the neurochemistry in some detail. And the first thing that research reveals, if you read it carefully, is that the unpredictability of the affection was not incidental to the bond. It was the engine. The biological anthropologist Helen Fisher's work on romantic attachment and the broader body of research on intermittent reinforcement, stretching back to B.F. Skinner's foundational behavioral studies, has shown something that most people find counterintuitive the first time they hear it. Dopamine, the neurotransmitter most associated with wanting, craving, motivation, is released more strongly by unpredictable rewards than by consistent ones. A stable partner who shows up every day with the same warmth produces in your brain a gentle, steady baseline of dopamine. An unstable partner who withdraws for days and then returns with sudden affection produces a much larger spike. Your brain, by design, treats the second pattern as more valuable. It is the same mechanism that makes gambling addictive. It is why the slot machine, with its variable reinforcement schedule, is one of the most effective behavioral devices human beings have ever built. It is also precisely the structure of the cycle you were living inside. You were not weak. Your reward system was doing exactly what reward systems do, in the presence of that specific input pattern. If you have ever wondered why, even after you knew, even after you could name everything that was wrong in clinical detail, some part of you still wanted to go back. This is why. The wanting was not the real you. The wanting was a reward system that had been conditioned by design to treat the cycle as more valuable than stability. The part of you that reached for the phone at 2 a.m. was the same part of you that, under different circumstances, would have reached for the next spin of a wheel. Not love, dopamine, which does not make the wanting less real. It was real, and it shaped months or years of your life. But it locates the wanting somewhere specific, somewhere other than your character. And the pain of the withdrawals was not in your head. The pain of the withdrawals was, in the most literal neurological sense, pain. The social neuroscientist Naomi Eisenberger, in a series of studies beginning in 2003 and formalized in a 2012 review in Nature Review's Neuroscience, has demonstrated that social rejection activates the same brain regions that process physical pain. The dorsal anterior cingulate cortex, the anterior insula, the regions that fire when you stub your toe, are the same regions that fire, just as hard, when someone you love goes cold on you. Your body was not overreacting. Your body was reporting an injury, and your body was reporting it more than once. Again, and again, and again. Each time the withdrawal happened, each time the warmth returned, each time the cycle restarted. If you have wondered why you feel, even now, months or years after the relationship ended, that your body still startles at certain sounds, at a tone of voice, at the particular silence that used to mean he was angry, that startle is not overreaction. That startle is a nervous system that has catalogued a specific pattern of injury and is watching, carefully, to make sure the injury does not begin again. It will take time for the startle to quiet. Nervous systems do not forget this kind of pattern quickly, but they do, with enough distance and enough safety, begin to file the pattern as past rather than present. The room you are in now do not require the vigilance. Eventually, your body will come to know this. Not all at once. Slowly. In the small moments when nothing happens and nothing keeps happening, and the part of you that has been waiting for the next strike begins, very gradually, to exhale. And here is what that means for you. If you have spent any amount of time blaming yourself for how much it hurt, for how long it took to leave, for how badly you wanted to go back, after you did, the hurt was never a character failing. The hurt was a measurable injury being inflicted day after day by someone who, the research now suggests, could see the injury with unusual clarity and did not stop. Not weakness. Injury, not failure. Biology, not your fault. There is a part of this that is hard to hold, and it has to be said anyway, because the research does not support letting it go. The same sensitivity that made you a target is not something to be amputated. That is the mistake a lot of recovery conversations quietly make. The implication that if you could just become less sensitive, less attuned, less empathic, you would be safe. You would also be someone else. A smaller version of yourself. A version with the volume turned down on the very organ that, used differently, is the source of almost everything good in your life. The Ahrens research, and the broader field that has grown up around it, has consistently found what has come to be called differential susceptibility. The same nervous systems that are more wounded by bad environments are, at the same time, more nourished by good ones. A highly sensitive child raised by unstable parents does worse on almost every measurable outcome than a non-sensitive child raised under the same conditions. A highly sensitive child raised by attuned, stable parents does better than a non-sensitive child raised in those same good conditions. The same nervous system, in different soil, produces very different trees. What this means is that the capacity that read the narcissist's moods with dread accuracy is the same capacity that, turned toward the right people, reads warmth with unusual depth. It is the same antenna. The only question is what it is being tuned to. And the slow work of recovery is not learning to feel less. It is learning to aim the feeling. Learning to notice, for the first time in your life, what your own nervous system is reporting about you. Not about the person across the table, not about the mood of the room, not about the small, unreadable distance in the voice of someone who is supposed to love you. About you. The strange thing most people who have lived through this describe, when they are some years out from it, is not the hardness of the leaving. It is the softness of what comes after. Room. Quiet in ways you did not know rooms could be quiet. Days go by without a scan running in the background. Your body, which has been a listening device for someone else for most of your life, begins, very gradually, to listen inward. At first, you will not know what you are hearing. The signal is too quiet. You have been tuned for so long to someone else's volume that your own registers almost as silence. A cup of tea held in your hands will seem, for a few seconds, unfamiliar, as though you had forgotten that warmth could arrive without cost. A stretch of unclaimed afternoon will produce a low-grade anxiety before it produces pleasure. Your body will keep expecting the demand that has always followed a moment of rest, and the demand will not come. And the not coming will, itself, take some getting used to. And then, slowly, in the weeks and months that follow, something shifts. You begin to notice, for the first time in a long time, that you have preferences, not ones you are performing, ones that are yours. You like this song. You do not like that room. This kind of weather makes you quiet. That kind of food makes you come back into yourself. The preferences are small, almost embarrassingly small, and they are, each of them, a reclamation. Each one a small territory returned to its original owner. And the thing your body finally hears, when it turns, the long, unattended weather of your own inner life, is more interesting than anything a narcissist ever said to you. That is not a consolation prize. That is what the sensitivity was always for. There is one more piece, and it belongs near the end. It is possible, reading this, that some part of you has been waiting for the sentence that locates the blame, either on you or on him. And it is worth saying, plainly, that the research does not fully cooperate with either version. Not because there is no harm. There was real harm. Not because responsibility does not matter. It does. But because the shape of the harm is more specific than the simple versions allow. The narcissist in your relationship was, most probably, once a child whose basic developmental needs were not met, whose nascent self was starved of mirroring in a way that left a permanent hole where an internal regulator should have been. That child grew up into an adult who uses other people to maintain a sense of self, because the internal machinery for maintaining it was never built. That adult was not a monster, but they were also not safe. And the unsafety was not a passing state. It was a structural feature of how they now function. You were, most probably, once a child whose sensitivity was pressed early into service, whose natural capacity for attunement became, too young, a survival skill, whose extra feeling was never an excess. It was a tool, built for a job, in a house that required it. Two children, each shaped differently, each shaped by the specific absence of something they needed. 30 years later, they walk into the same room, and their nervous systems, long before their conscious minds, recognize each other, not as soulmates, as matching wounds. This is not a story with a villain and a victim, although there are plenty of stories that fit that frame and serve their purpose. This is a story about what unaddressed childhood wounds do when they meet each other in adulthood. What they build, what they cost, and how the costs in one person were designed to be paid by the other. Which does not mean you were responsible for what was done to you. It means you were recruited, without your knowledge, into a dynamic whose rules were written before either of you arrived in the room. And the remarkable thing, the thing that is worth holding, if you can, is that you are right now further along in rewriting those rules than the other person will likely ever be. Because you are the one listening. You are the one asking the question. You are the one who, at some point, noticed that the weather was not right, that something in the relationship was costing you a version of yourself you could not afford to lose, that noticing is not small, that noticing is, in a very real sense, the first movement in the direction of your own life. So here is where we come back to. The scan is quieter now, not gone. Old habits of vigilance do not disappear the moment they lose their purpose, but quieter. The room you are in tonight is not being scanned. The frequency you spent your whole life broadcasting is not, at this moment, being picked up by anyone. For once, no one is reading you. For once, you are simply here. You were not broken. You were precisely tuned to a frequency that mattered, once in a place you had no power to leave. And now you live somewhere else. The door behind you is closed. The room you are in now, however small, however unfurnished, is yours. The work from here is narrower than you think, and quieter. Not to lose the sensitivity, not to build walls so high that nothing gets in. That kind of armor costs the whole self to maintain, and it does not keep the right people out. Only the wrong ones in, behind the wall, where they still have access to everything that made the wall necessary. The work is smaller, the slow act of turning the old antenna the other way. The attention that has lived all your life on the face of someone else, moving for the first time onto your own face. The question that has always been, what do they need from me becoming, for once, what do I need? What do I actually need? If you recognize any of this, if some part of what has been said here matches the shape of what you have lived, consider it a permission, not a prescription. A permission to stop asking why it took you so long. It took you as long as it did because it was supposed to. Every minute of it was informed by a nervous system that was trying, in the only way it knew, to keep you alive. That nervous system did not fail you. It delivered you here. You can choose yourself now, not at random, with precision. If this found you tonight and something in it felt true, there is more here for other nights when it is hard to rest. You might consider subscribing so it can find its way back to you when you need it most. For now, breathe. The room you are in is quiet. The weather outside your window belongs to no one you have to manage. Nothing for your body to scan for, nothing you need to prevent. The part of you that has been on duty all this time is allowed, finally, to rest.